This wooden chapel on the estate of Halston Hall is a bit of an eye-catcher in an 18th century landscape garden. But there are clues that suggest a medieval history that may go way back. Now, records suggest that somewhere in this area stood an important medieval preceptory, a sort of monastic settlement created for the Knights Hospitallers to raise money for the Crusades. But where exactly it stood, no one knows. On one of his early morning walks, Stewart became absolutely convinced that he could see the preceptory here in the lumps and bumps of this landscape. In fact, he's even drawn us a little map.
And we've got the local community behind us, we brought all the time team together, we've even got an audience of cows to watch, and we've only got 3 days to do it.
Only one preceptory has been fully excavated, so this is both a massive challenge and a golden opportunity. So we brought a huge team of archaeologists, experts and volunteers, and we'll be using all the latest technology as well as some more down-to-earth techniques.
Life has just never been more glamorous.
To find out whether this is the important medieval site that Stewart thinks it is. Halston Hall lies a mile or so from Whittington Castle, a marcher castle fought over by the Welsh and English during the medieval period. In the 12th century, Lord of Whittington, Roger de Powys, granted a portion of this land to the Knights Hospitallers, and over the course of a century, it expanded to be the most important Knights Hospitallers site in the north of England and Wales. So what attracted you to this site, Stuart?
Well, I was asked to look at the lumps and bumps of the castle in Whittington, which were interesting enough, and I thought, oh, there's a great opportunity for a community landscape archaeology project. So I started to look at the LiDAR of the area, and on it I saw that, which is a wonderful rectangular-ish enclosure formed by ditches. We're walking along one of these ditches now. To me, this sort of classic medieval moated site, which I wasn't expecting to find.
But those lumps and bumps, what convinced you that they're medieval and that it wasn't just an 18th century landscape? You seem pretty confident about this, Stuart, though.
Well, fingers crossed, but I am reasonably confident, and if we're right, I might just buy John Gator a drink. You
wow, that is quite something. John's Geophys team have already been hard at work scanning the area inside the enclosure for signs of buildings. So, John, I think Stuart's promising you a drink.
Oh, telltale.
So, how are you going to find me a preceptory?
Well, it's all here.
It's all here?
Yeah. Well, we've actually gone in and done some magnetics, and they agree totally with Stewart's earthworks. We've got lots of targets within the earthworks, and we've done a small amount of radar, and if you look at the radar results, look, we've got such a clear structure there on the outside of this wall.
That's just on the edge of that earthwork platform there, John, that sort of flat area out there that you can see.
Yes,
yeah.
It's actually outside by the look of it.
Right.
That is an ideal target.
It's in the centre of the enclosure. It's where you might expect buildings to be. So
oh, really?
We've got targets everywhere in here. Why don't we just get on with it then, because it's not going to stay dry for the rest of the shoot, is it?
So with rain forecast and so much potential in the site, Matt gets going in trench 1.
Just do a little bit further back, and then we'll take the topsoil off, and then we'll do the subsoil, and then we'll move back.
But will these features prove to be a medieval preceptory or 18th century garden landscaping?
I mean, there's no structures in there, but there's a lot of brick rubble. There's a tile there, possibly some building stone.
So it looks like we're into the archaeology, but bricks suggest we're a few hundred years later than the Preceptory. The Knights Hospitallers combined the life of a monk with that of a knight. In around 1070, they were founded as a hospital in Jerusalem to provide hospitality, medical care for the sick, poor and injured pilgrims to the Holy Land. But after the First Crusade in 1099, they found themselves increasingly embroiled in battle.
This whole region is now under Christian control, but most of the Crusaders then just go home, so there's a big manpower shortage. So you then have groups like the Hospitallers and like the Templars taking on a military role, where they're going to combine the life of being a monk, praying, charity, with that of a knight, in that they fight to defend the pilgrims, but also to defend the Crusader states themselves by joining the new kingdom's armies.
Why did they become powerful in Britain? Why would anybody support that going on such a long way away?
Because the idea of crusading becomes really important to medieval European society. If you are a nobleman, if you're a king, this is the sort of thing that you're expected to engage in, at least in some way. Maybe you don't have to go all the way out to Jerusalem. A way that you can show support for crusade instead is you can give some land to the Hospitallers.
So Halston is just a little tiny cell in an enormous international organisation in the 12th century and onwards.
Yes, it is a link to the rest of the world going through this. And money from here and people recruited here can then find themselves in Jerusalem or later in Rhodes or Malta.
Bit of glass as well. Really, really, really thin window glass.
In Trench 1, Matt's already onto the remains of some sort of building.
We've got bits of brick there.
Yep.
I don't know how they compare to the stuff in the church. Bits of stone. I don't know. I thought that was mortar, but is it?
Let's have a look. I think that's from a lath and plaster, either a ceiling or a partition.
So that would be inside a building. That's the kind of smooth surface that you would see.
Yeah, 'cause these indents here would be where the wooden laths were, that this would be sort of shoved up against. So it can either be a ceiling if it's that way up, and if it's that way up, it's going to be on a partition. So either way, we can't really tell at the moment, but it's been lime washed, so it's pretty high status bit of kit that. So is that a bit of glass there, Matt?
Yeah, very, very thin, delicate bit of glass.
Extremely thin.
Isn't that beautiful?
It is. It's miniature, isn't it? A bit of glass like that with a shimmery rainbow effect on it.
So we're getting a sense of a building, but what sort of period would it have been?
It's difficult to tell at the moment. We've got all the bits, but not in the right order at the moment. We've got brick, we've got plaster, we've got glass. So we're not looking at anything that's going to be medieval or anything like that. It's going to be post-medieval, so we're probably looking at something way after the Preceptory.
But that's where I come in, because I think what we need to do here is clear away all this brick, all this later rubble. You can see the edge of the building there. We might get some structure underneath it, we might get foundations, we might even get a floor, but who knows, beneath that, there might be something to do with the Preceptory.
Fingers crossed.
As part of our investigations, we're creating a digital timeline for this site. And records suggest that our story starts in the 11th century when our Preceptory was founded. But one of the most valuable sources of information about what we might find in the ground is an inventory created in 1338.
It's a list of all the income and expenses for Halston and all the lands that it controls. These are all of its properties in North Wales. So Halston doesn't actually start until all the way down here, and you can just make out Halston written
with
at
the
the
long
side
S,
there.
yes, yes.
And then these two lines give a description of the actual buildings at the site. So you've got the messuage, which is just a house, and that's for hosting the Hospitallers living here, and then also anyone else who might come and visit. And also it has a garden, which you've got just there, and a dovecot. So each entry, as well as listing all their property and their finances, also lists the staff for the Preceptory and gives us the names of the actual Hospitallers living at the site. So we've got names of the two resident Hospitallers at the bottom here.
You're going to have to read those out to me. I cannot work those out.
So the first one is Brother Philip de Luder, and he's a preceptor and a sergeant.
Yes, right, so what's a sergeant?
So sergeants are a mixture of people who might still fight, or they might be more sort of administrators, but the important thing is that they're not of knightly birth, so they're lower in rank. And then below we've got Brother Albinus, which we'd probably translate as Aubrey de Neville, and he's also a sergeant.
Wow.
It's fantastic to have the names of preceptors who lived at Halston in 1338. But the icing on the cake would be to find evidence in the ground of where and how they lived.
Good to go, John?
Trench 2's going in over another feature in the geophys, which John hopes could be one of the buildings mentioned in the inventory.
Some building stone, probably. Just in the topsoil, so we can keep going now. Just a little bit deeper.
The chapel at the centre of the enclosure is a very unusual wooden structure, but we're not sure whether it dates back to the time of the Preceptory or whether it's a later addition. Adams used aerial photogrammetry to create a 3D model to help our investigations. And Richard Morris, our buildings expert, has already spotted signs that it might be earlier than we thought.
That is just, if it is what I think it is, it's quite astonishing. So that looks like a Saxon font to me.
Saxon font?
Saxon.
Yeah.
And what sort of date range would you put on there?
I would have thought 10th century, that kind of
So that's
date.
way before the Preceptory was
yes,
here.
yeah.
I mean, what's that doing here?
Have you identified any carvings or any patterning?
Only on the base, which seems to be a separate thing altogether. If you look on this side, the base,
Oh,
rich decoration on there.
Mm.
There's some patterning on here, which
yeah,
could be
I see.
natural or it could be, real. I don't know.
We have a few techniques we could probably apply to this, allow us to 3D model it and try and tease out a bit of information.
That would be interesting.
See if there's anything on there.
I mean, that would be very useful.
So is there anything else in here that's caught your eye?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, it's lined with wainscot at the moment, and that's been dated to various dates by people. One of the common dates is 1725, and that's because of the date on that coat of arms on the pulpit. But the pulpit wainscot doesn't look anything like the rest of the wainscot. This looks much earlier, probably early 17th century.
Now, I can't help but notice as we came in there was something else.
There was something else, wasn't there?
So what do you think of this, Richard?
It's rather great, isn't it? I mean, this is a genuine medieval stone tomb. I mean, this has got to belong to the Hospitallers.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a classic sort of, that kind of thing you get in monasteries and abbeys all over the place. And this is, nobody's going to drag this from anywhere else to this place. So I think that's going to be a genuine Hospitaller coffin, stone coffin.
Incredible. So this is a medieval stone sarcophagus, you think, for this site?
Yeah.
Perhaps one of the preceptors or knights was buried inside this coffin. But was this the chapel that he would have worshipped in, and which was mentioned in the 1338 inventory? Or is it something later?
But the one thing we're looking at, you've only got the one door at the moment at the west end through that 18th century tower. So we're looking to see whether there are any more doorways. If you look in this particular bay here, you'll see these are concrete.
Yeah.
But then if you look there, you've got a lot of peg holes. And if you look at those peg holes and the pattern, and in the middle, you've got a little indent there into the sole plate. And if you look back, you'll see in the plinth a vertical break there and a vertical break there.
Yeah.
So I think all this has been rebuilt, and that's where the original door was.
Do you know what? I'd never have recognised that if you hadn't pointed it out. That's amazing.
So, I mean, the importance of that is you've got a doorway here that goes into the internal decoration of a chapel, which 17th century panelling.
Aha.
So this doorway has to predate the 17th century panelling.
So it seems the Halston Chapel has a complex history stretching further back than first look suggested. We're using laser scanners to hunt for evidence of the original chapel gifted to the Hospitallers in the 11th century and used by them throughout the medieval period.
Richard,
Nice bit of stone.
just the man.
And back in Trench 2, Stewart thinks he might have found a nice chunky bit of medieval building.
It's
that
just
little indent.
It's been, yeah, it's been broken off something here.
Yeah.
And if that was stood up like that, you can.
What, you think of an
it's got
arched head or
shape
something?
to it.
Yeah.
I think it's got a bit of shape. Don't you?
Yeah, I can see something, but I worry that I'm just sort of
I have
casting
faith.
my own particular hopes onto a lump of stone. But
So what do you think?
Well, it's not. It doesn't look like it's an erratic of any description. It looks like it's being worked for something, but whether it's being worked as a nice carved piece of decoration is a bit tricky to tell because we haven't got much of it left, have we?
This is the sort of thing you might expect with a medieval.
Certainly, I mean, I would imagine that's going to be medieval, whether it's worked stone per se, or whether it's just part of a stone of a building, then it certainly looks more like to be medieval than it is going to be for the post-med, because we're getting lots of brick elsewhere, and this certainly isn't brick.
Let's get a second large stone coming out here.
Good news, and there's more of it.
And it's hard to tell whether that's been shaped in any way.
We've had our first medieval find in Trench 1, where Keith's been metal detecting on the spoil heap. It's a tiny mount.
I think it probably is medieval, probably late medieval though, so sort of 1450, 1600 into the post-medieval period.
Yeah.
But as the light's coming down, can you see that
Yes.
that edge, that top edge is faceted, so it's catching the light, and originally it would have been a golden colour, so it's a thing which would have sparkled. And it's got a very, well, I'm not sure if that's the original length on the back of it, but if it's that short, it must be a piece of saddlery or something like that. So, yeah, maybe sort of a decorative mount of a saddle or...
Yes, I like the idea of that. So probably you've got several of these on a saddle.
Yeah.
So the horse is riding through the sunlight and you've got all these amazing mounts, no green, but they would have been very brassy coloured, golden, shining in the sunlight.
Yeah, catching light as it's galloping through the countryside.
Wow, I love that. It's fantastic. It's quite exciting, isn't it?
For something so small, it's great. Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, right, let's go.
Helping us with this dig are volunteers from local schools, historical societies and the Young Archaeologists Club.
OK, Stewart, we've got all the volunteers assembled. We've got 7 groups, each of which has got at least one adult with them, so we can do 7 test pits to start. What's the overall strategy?
Well, it's to look at what's going on outside the main enclosure. We know from the 1338 visitation document that there were the gardens here. We should expect things like orchards and there'll be animals around. And it's to find out what's happening outside, in the fields, in the trackways approaching.
So each of the test pits will be 1 metre square.
Yeah.
We can compare the volume of soil shifted in the test pits with the trenches and see if you've got more or less of it as you get away from the site, which might give you an idea of intensity of occupation. We can maybe have a look at the flotation of some of the soils and see what that's saying about what those bits of landscape might have been used for.
It looks to me as if it's going to be a great bit of fun as well, because they're learning how to do this at the same time, aren't they?
Test pit's great because essentially you're doing the whole archaeological process. So we've got this sort of step-by-step guide here that we've used for 2,500 of these.
I think I should really read that.
But actually what it does, it means everyone's following the same method, but essentially it's like a dig-in mini. So they're going right from the very beginning of laying out the site, drawing a sketch map to show where it is, going down layer by layer and then making good the site afterwards. So they do get that whole experience.
Isn't it great to see sort of archaeology being done, but actually a whole new generation being enthused by doing this?
Absolutely, and hopefully some of them it'll carry on as a lifelong interest.
Archaeology really is addictive, and nothing quite beats the thrill of finding something that adds to the story, as I discovered in Trench 2.
Peter, could you have a look at this for me? Pull this out.
Oh my goodness.
The spoil heap.
From the spoil here?
Yes.
Okay, well it's a piece of glazed, what looks like glazed drinks vessel, a drinking vessel. So it's relatively thin. I would have thought it's actually going to be sort of 1550, 1650 in date, so sort of into the early post-medieval. And actually, you see this rough surface on the bottom. This is where the pot's been glazed and it's been put in the kiln, and that's where the base of the kiln has basically melted it. So you've got that sort of bubbly
base. So we've got the bottom of a drinking cup. And probably about this high with maybe 2 or 3 handles. They're called tigs. And yeah, they're sort of, we know it's late Cistercian ware. I'd need to look at the fabric to know a little bit more, but...
And what, a tig, that it would be what, sort of a communal drinking cup?
It's a communal drinking cup, so you'd have a drink and you pass it on and they take the handle and drink it, and yeah.
The date takes us to the end of the medieval period, and once it's been cleaned up, it will be a great find to put into my new Time Team virtual museum. And it'll be joining the 1338 inventory, the Saxon font from the chapel, and the stone sarcophagus. In the dome, Stewart's sharing plans of known preceptories to give everyone a better idea of what we might find.
I've put on the screen here a number of examples of other Hospitallers sites. You can see the red is a defining bank. The blue is water around, like a moat. They're all rectilinear enclosures.
And all much the same size?
All much the same size. So what you'd be looking for is, if you're looking for a medieval preceptory like ours, you'd be looking for something in an enclosure like that, and we have one here. So that's one big reason why this, I think, it follows that pattern.
And Rory, do you think there's room here to put all those elements that we could see on the 1338 visitation?
Oh, certainly, and there's only a few particular buildings that we know about from the 1338 survey. We know that there'll be a lot more than just the house, the garden, the dovecot in that area, and the watermill somewhere around. So they could certainly fit within this area.
And have we got any historic maps that help?
Here we are, Halston. There's the chapel there. This is a 1765 map. And it shows a leat, a water channel coming off the river in front of, to the north of Preceptory, which is where the stream pretty much is now.
And what do you think that's for?
Well, that's the sort of thing that could form 2 functions. It could be a leat to take water to a watermill. It could be to help drain the fields and lands. It could also be part of a chain of water feeding into other ponds. And interestingly, there's a big fish pond. So it's a classic medieval rectilinear fish pond.
Halston's earthwork suggests that there was an enclosure ditch, just like the other preceptories. So Henry and Naomi are coring it to see what they can find out about it.
Ugh. Okay. I reckon the next one there's just going to be a gush of water. Oh! Looks like charcoal. That is charcoal. So how far down are we now?
We're over 1.5 meters now.
Metre and a half, and we've got a piece of charcoal.
It's deep and wet, which suggests it might have been part of a water management system. We're well into the afternoon of day 1, and yet to find any evidence of the buildings that stood here in 1338.
Hello. Oh, Chris here. Just found this lovely bit of decorated tile.
Wow, I like it.
But in Trench 2, Hilda's team have found something quite promising.
This would be about yay big originally, so we haven't got quite what the pattern is. Quite often they're heraldic, or obviously in this context they'd be religious as well, but they are fantastic bits. And if you've got one encouraging tile, you'd expect to have a lot, because there's to be a whole floor of them.
So do you see where there's this flat bit here, but then it appears to have broken off further down?
Yep, I think that's part of the manufacturing process, but they'll have a whole sort of almost like a tray of them, stamping them, and then snap them off.
And it speaks to the sort of the sophistication, not just of the making process, but you imagine also the markets that would have needed to come together for different kinds of glazes,
yes,
the sorts of different manufacturing processes.
Could you put any kind of period or date on it?
I mean, it's medieval, that's for sure, but giving it any more specific date than that, I think is impossible at the moment. So, but I think it would go with the preceptory rather than afterwards.
It's extraordinary to think that this tile might once have been walked over by knights offering hospitality to pilgrims and other travellers. It's definitely one for my virtual museum.
OK, John, good to go?
So with renewed enthusiasm, we're opening up 2 new trenches. Trench 3, investigating a curious deep ditch-like feature on the geophys to the south of the chapel.
This is almost certainly what's giving off John's magnetic signal in this area. So we've come down to the layer we definitely want to be at. We just don't know what it is, and we don't know how big it is.
And to the north of the chapel, Trench 4 goes in, across one of Stewart's lumps and bumps that ties in with a geophysical anomaly.
So that could be that right angle I wanted.
I think it could be, yeah.
Just a bit more off.
And in Trench 1, Matt and Josh have found a wall.
Follow that along, and all the morning's work has been worthwhile, hasn't it?
And Stewart's wondering whether it might have been part of an old dovecot.
This is quite a small bird, I'm thinking.
Would it be anything like a pigeon?
Could be pigeon-like, could be pigeon-like, yeah.
It could be quite interesting because there is a reference in a document here to a proposal to build a dovecot, but on the site of the old dovecot.
Ah.
The question is, does the archaeology look like a dovecot? Matt's not convinced.
You can see this trench is in 2 halves, really. You've got the kind of soily end over there, and here's our wall over here. Can you see the bricks coming across there? That's it.
So that's the inside of...
This is the inside, yeah, and then that's the old ground surface. Stu has got a theory that here was a dovecot. We had all the brick rubble of a building. It's positioned right in front of the house, lovely to look at. The trouble is, it's filling a big rubble void. You've got this lovely brick wall going straight down, and I'm standing on at least 70 centimetres, possibly more, of rubble. Wow. I don't know of any dovecots which have a kind of cellar which you could kind of backfill with rubble. So I don't think it's a dovecot.
So what do you think it might be?
I'm not sure. I mean, we're positioned in front of the house for a folly or a building made purely for visual entertainment. So why there's a kind of functional cellar or undercroft of some sort, I don't know. So my answer, I'm afraid, Gus, is at the moment, I've got no idea.
But do the finds give us a clue as to what might have been here?
Well, some of them do. So we've got this post-medieval pottery, part of another TIG, like the TIG you found earlier, but this one's much later, so this is going to be sort of more 1720, 1760. The bit which is much more exciting is this, which is a late medieval encaustic floor tile, which is going to date from around about 1450, 1400, 1450, which is intriguing because it's not inside the chapel, it's outside the chapel. But it's the sort of thing that when you refurbish a chapel, yes, you get rid of the rubbish floor which was there and you put a nice new floor down. So are we looking at a renovation of this and a church here before or a chapel here before? Or are we looking at a site of a new building, as in a medieval building here?
We're hoping the stonework in Trench 1 could be the footings of one of the buildings of Halston's Preceptory. Meanwhile, in Trench 3, they've found charcoal and something much earlier.
This piece of pottery is not medieval.
When's this?
It's Roman.
Not what we were after.
Oh, clay pipe.
Clay pipe, yeah.
We're on the money.
In Trench 4, Chris is already beginning to reveal some bricks and stones quite near the surface.
So it's very early days of cleaning at the moment, but it looks like we've got a wall line appearing between about there and there, where we've got this greyer stony and CBM and the kind of chalk and mortar packing. The geophys suggests that carries across the trench and then returns and goes back off that way, and again outside the trench this way and returns. So hopefully we've got some kind of U-shaped building.
Good news too in Trench 2, where Hilda's beginning to expose a floor surface.
Proper cobbles.
On the other side, can you spare?
And a couple of surprising finds.
Lovely.
if it is a glazed roof tile, they're exceptionally rare on rural sites in Shropshire, as in really rare.
I didn't know that. Does that mean we couldn't have one?
No, but we've got a high status medieval building, haven't we? So why can't we have a high status medieval roof tile?
Well, we could. It would be rather lovely if we did.
This is late in the history of the site, so this is going to be sort of 1450, 1400, 1500-ish.
I think that makes it very exciting.
That is really exciting.
It's a good piece for day one.
Yeah.
The green glazed roof tiles must have made quite a statement in the later medieval period, and Trench 2 has produced another rare find from an earlier date.
So going from buildings to small finds, so we've got a lovely domestic find here, a spindle wall, lead spindle wall, and you can just see here it's got little patterns all around it, these little circular globules, and this would have been used to spin wool with, to make a thread. So this is the weight that would weight the wool down. Predominantly used by women. Probably date is actually probably quite early. I was just having a chat with Helen. We reckon maybe 1100 to 1200.
Ooh, that's the earliest thing then we've got so far.
Excellent.
This little spindle whorl was probably dropped by one of the women weaving woolen textiles for the monks, or maybe to generate income for the Preceptory. It could date back as far as the foundation of the Preceptory in the late 12th century, when the Crusades were at their height and the area around Whittington Castle was embroiled in bitter battles between the Welsh and the English. We're still short of in situ archaeology, but Stewart's still confident that we'll locate the elusive buildings listed in the 1338 inventory.
The thing that's really, really nice in a way is what's coming up in that trench there, where there's a courtyard surface coming up, and we should be expecting courtyards in a Preceptory area. That might be our first tangible below ground thing that we're starting to understand.
But you said there'd be a hall amongst lots of other buildings. We've put the trenches in over the radar where we've got suggestions of structures, and they've all turned out to be later in date, 17th, 18th century, garden sort of features, for want of a better term. And when I asked you earlier in the day, could the chapel be part of the hall rather than a separate building, you seem to be adamant that the chapel was separate, that we had
not adamant. It's that we've only got one site where we've had Hospitallers excavation to understand one. That's at South Witham, and that's an external one.
And there's no reason why monasteries all have to be the same. We always think of them as being on the same plan, but it's only particular houses like the Cistercians, Carthusians that are like that. Other ones are really individual. This could be like anything.
So it could be that structure there is not actually the original chapel, but that could be the hall.
It's distinctly possible. The strategy here is we're evaluating what we've got on day one using the techniques we've got, and the plan is to then look closer to this area. We're actually narrowing down what we're looking at.
What I want to do is take the radar initially inside the chapel that we talked about, see if we can find this early vault. But I'd really like to do the graveyard itself to see if we can find any walls or any features extending beyond that black and white building.
But the thing is, this is day one. You know, we're bound to be in a situation where we're not sure. You know, even I'd like you to be sure, John, but I think that at the end of day one, we've got to be realistic.
So will Stewart prove that the visible lumps and bumps are the remains of Halston's medieval preceptory, or are we actually looking at an 18th century garden landscape? 2 days left to find out.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses and behind-the-scenes insights.